All right. Hello and welcome back. My name is Chad Toprak and I'm the director of Free Play. I'd like to welcome you to our next panel, Games Gig, aligning indie music with indie games. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Free Play hosts and broadcasts from the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, where stories have been shared and games have been played since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and to anyone watching who has a connection to the world's oldest living culture. Sovereignty was never ceded, and the violence of the colonial project is still ongoing. So joining us today are the fantastic people from Games Gig. We have Jacob Laney, Maze Wallen, and Alison Walker. I will hand it over to them to take it from here. Please welcome Jacob, Maze, and Alison.
Thanks, Chad. Hey, everyone. We're really excited to be here. I don't know if many of you know about our event Games Gig that was meant to be tomorrow night, which was meant to be a live in-person gig, hangout, after party, dancing, all that kind of stuff, which has been now online. But today we're going to be kind of talking about the initial reasons that we put it on, what we're hoping to get out of it, and why it's important to bring, or why we think it's important to bring indie music and indie games together. Maze, do you want to kind of introduce it a little bit further?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways to introduce Games Gig is to talk about the lineup a little bit and how we both sit in indie music and indie games. So I reckon I'll start with my own intro. So I've been in game audio for almost 10 years now and started off in like live music, live art kinds of things. And the way that I interact with indie music industry now is, is through every now and then, I guess, doing a small gig with like a noise gig or something like that, something totally improvised, or, doing something for a mate. And then the other part is, I guess, working a lot with indie bands and working them into games and things, or working with musicians to get their music into games, and those sorts of industry focused things. And then I guess games people are often treated as like this kind of interesting novelty, like look, there's an avenue for music. So often I'll be at music conferences or something like that talking about how it works in games. And yeah, I think that often it's an interesting sort of identification of like, when you're at a party and someone asks you, what do? You either say, I work in video games, or you say like, I'm a musician, or I work in audio, So yeah, I think I'm mostly based in games, pretty much completely, but still in touch, I guess, with the indie music industry. Yeah, Alison, how about you?
Oh, I feel like I'm mostly within the live audio setting, kind of almost entirely for the last couple of years, and games audio is like the sort of side hustle, I guess, for me. I'm like a live sound engineer first and foremost. Like that's where I get most of well, it's where I used to get most of my money. I mean,
yep.
So much for that, right? And I guess we can talk about that a bit later. But yeah, that's one of the things that I do. I do a bunch of other stuff. I run like workshops for people to like teach them how to get into certain aspects of audio. I also make music for games. I make my own games. I make my own game, one, not plural. Yeah, sort of a mishmash. I do sort of a bunch of different things just to kind of keep my interest sparked and also to keep me afloat, because often there's like not a lot of money in any one of those things, but all together they kind of form this one weird audio job that I do. Yeah, that's me. And sometimes I perform. I play in bands and stuff like that. But mostly I'm sort of more behind the scenes until, I don't know, there's a big gig happening and then I'm suddenly pushed onto the stage.
It's really interesting, Maze, that you're so heavily rooted in games, and Alison, you're more heavily rooted in audio or live music. I feel like I'm smack bang in the middle. I definitely started in music and audio. For a long time, I really wanted to be a producer and a songwriter. So I ended up, working at a recording studio in Melbourne and, writing a lot of music, recording, being in rock bands and touring and doing all of that, like very heavily music industry thing. And games was just like, oh, one day maybe I'll write some music for some games. And then that day came about for whatever reason, but I found that I just fell in love with actually making games. So I kind of moved more into games for maybe a couple of years and did a bit of freelance work. But really, really quickly, I felt like with music, I liked creating music to express myself and to create something that I wanted to create rather than creating something from someone else's vision. So I kind of stopped doing much composing or audio work because I wanted to make my own music for me. And I stopped doing freelance games work. There's still a bit every now and then. But what I wanted to do was like find a way to equally balance those two passions somehow, tread in both of those industries and express myself in both of those ways and somehow fit that all into like a working week. I don't know if I have the answer to that yet. But last year I developed kind of my first substantial music game mashup. So it was a 20-minute game called Video World that was a companion to a synth pop EP that I'd put out under my music name, Monster Mansion. And that was really successful in terms of the creativity behind it, I guess. Like I discovered that, yes, actually I can be in both of these industries and kind of do both of these things equally. So now I'm kind of at the point of figuring out how to make that grow and also how to incorporate live music. So I'm really stoked to be doing Games Gig tomorrow, but also chatting with you both with kind of more feet in either industry. So I guess something that I'd really love to talk about and ask you both is how you actually do manage being in both of those industries. Like, do you go to all of the music conferences and all of the games conferences? How do you, like Maisie said, when you go to parties, how do you introduce yourself? How do you both manage kind of being in both worlds?
Well, the conference thing is interesting because I've definitely found that music conferences pay you to go, while games conferences don't. Apart, lovely.
Gotta get on that.
But like that's the thing, right, Alison? I'm not being invited because of my musicianship. I'm being invited as some weird novelty. Like, then I went to fast forward in Sydney in 2019 or 18. And yeah, this totally counts as a party, person in zone chat. And there was this slide that someone from Warner put up that said, there was some survey that said that people feel more immersed in video games than they do in live music. And I was just like, this sums up why you asked me here, like there's no collaboration. There's just like this trying to exploit one or the other. So like, yeah, I think that's one of my feelings about when I'm kind of going to one conference or the other and someone tries to ask me about the other one. It's very rarely about collaboration. And I think that's why in the last couple of years I've focused so much more into indie music and indie games and those parallels. So yeah, I think that's maybe how I try and balance being in both industries, is to focus those parts of the industries. Like, yeah, and I don't know, I worked on my first AAA game last year as well, and that sucked. That was like a bad time. And so turns out I like indie more in games as well. So yeah, I think that's part of it. The people.
That's where all the good stuff is, in the indie world.
Yeah, well,
I feel that way at least.
Yeah, like, we're raising money in these different itch bundles and stuff, and that's all indie as well. Yeah, we're definitely carrying AAA games, to use a gamer term, carrying them through the innovation and just shit that matters.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I did want to make a note on that thing that you said about feeling like a novelty. I really resonate with that when it comes to game audio in particular, because like even people outside of the industry, you tell them like, I work in audio and like I do a bunch of stuff. I do all these things, and like and then I also like make music for video games, and people are always like, oh my God, whoa, that's so cool. That's so incredible. This weird thing. It's like, yeah, it's really hard. It's like, it's not this like magical, wonderful thing that I think, it sort of sounds like. I have a lot of fun with it, but it's like, it's still like a lot of hard work. And then to try and convince people that the work that you do for that kind of stuff is really like, can be quite serious and can have like quite a lot of like depth and stuff is really hard as well. Especially since like live music and stuff, it's, you go to a gig and like people are like, you sort of expect some level of like kind of I guess like emotional depth. Like you're all there to sort of like engage in this person's like world that they're building, or like you're there to have fun, and there's some kind of like, you're there to feel some kind of thing if like the band can pull it off really well, I guess. And with like game audio, it's like there's that assumption kind of isn't there, I guess. I feel I don't know if you feel that at the conferences and stuff, Maze, but yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah. It's a really different vibe going to a gig, and I don't know, I miss it a lot. Like we were just chatting that even this 2-week conference lockdown, similar, has cancelled like 6 weeks of music in Melbourne, and yeah, I don't know, it's just freeing. Like, yeah. That, yeah, doing game audio is pretty cool. It's pretty amazing. And I kind of feel like I have to remind myself of that sometimes. I was talking to another colleague in game audio just earlier, Quimina Brace, who's in Melbourne. He's a very cool sound person who's here. And we were talking about like how anything 9 to 5 could become a little bit soulless or a bit of a hard work or things like that. Yeah, I think that like it would be cool, like gigs being so different, it would be cool if, live indie music could be more embraced in games, and that comes to like, Jacob, you've had more experience with this, but also like, vocal music and stuff, if there were more music with vocals in games and pop songs in games, maybe we would have more live gigs that weren't just orchestral or chiptune and you know, these kinds of industries, I guess, could be more aligned. Yeah. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that are like happening or have happened that I think are actually moving in the right direction. But to kind of jump back to a point before about how each industry just wants to exploit the other industry.
Yeah.
I think that's very, very much true, even though that I think that there's a lot of really good sides to each other exploiting each other. But I think if we can see that the exploitation can be much more collaborative, I think that's where the real magic is. Like the KDA, the band that was created, you know, a mishmash of kind of Western bands and some K-pop artists for League of Legends. Like that did so well, and they've continued releasing music that's really, really good. And I think that's a huge
It is good music. It's so good.
It's great. It's great. I love it.
I'm so glad about that, because like when you put I guess maybe when you put those words like of like this band created for League of Legends, I'm like, oh dear. And to hear that it's awesome, that's so sick.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I think that's the first example that I've really seen. There's probably some others, but the first major example of a collaboration with a AAA game, and you know, essentially AAA, you know, big records company artists actually collaborating and actually doing something that's valuable, that's creative, and it unites this fandom. Like I think that we in games we can take for granted our fans and people that get really obsessed about games, and we often like talk down about them, go, oh, you know, those gamers are like so obsessed, they need to get over it. But actually they're the ones that drive so many sales, and you want those people. And it's the same in the music industry. You have these dedicated fans. There's kind of this old, I guess, rule or way of thinking in the music industry that you just need 1,000, you know, diehard fans and you're successful, because they will spend, you know, every time a release comes out, they'll buy the CD, they'll buy all of the t-shirts, they'll come to every single show, they'll throw you extra money, they'll stream you on Spotify every day. And games has those fans as well that are going to buy the regular edition and then the deluxe edition and then all of the merch and then go
on every platform.
Yeah, exactly. And finding, you know, those people that can fall in love with a game franchise, and then the soundtrack or the artist that kind of comes along with that, they're going to spend all of that money and all of their time on the game, but then also on the artist and the music side. And I think from a very capitalistic point of view, it makes so much sense to combine them, because you're, you know, almost doubling your revenue essentially of what you can get from people. But I also think that you're, you know, bringing a lot more value to it, and you're kind of, you know, rather than a game just being a one-off thing or a music release being a one-off thing, it kind of spreads more widely, you know, almost like, you know, Marvel has kind of spread into lots of different areas. There's Marvel games, there's Marvel movies, and I guess with any big franchise, and I don't necessarily think franchising is right for indies necessarily, but there's still kind of that, you know, that way that we can exploit each other in a collaborative and great way that brings value to each other.
I think also like combining the cool, sorry, Alison, go for it.
Oh, I was going to go on a bit of a rant, so I think you should go first.
Okay. Combining the good elements of each audience, like, for example, you know, those classic music lovers who still go to a record store, or, you know, and trawl through records, or go on Bandcamp and do the kind of Wikipedia rabbit hole where they, this artist recommends this artist, recommends this artist, recommends this artist, and then they've wound up with like 100 artists. And, you know, tell all their friends and things like that. I think that indie games audiences are starting to do that, because they're starting to realize that indie games has a similar dynamic where we're collaborating with one another, like, you know, worked for this studio, then work for this studio, then hire my friend, then work for this studio, you know, and those similar creatives kind of hopping around, which is what happens in indie games and in indie music. Yeah, I think trying to find like the nice bits of each audience. I definitely don't really, I don't know, like I guess both have awful stalkers and death threats and things like that. Let's take that away. Yeah, but I think that, you know, often indie games is talking about, you know, look at the music industry and look how they've dealt with piracy and the race to the bottom and all of these things, and let's see how we can do it in games, or, you know, let's look at the music industry around discoverability and things like that. Can we do that in games? And we haven't talked a lot about audiences and those different habits. Yeah. Anyway, I think that was also right. Alison?
Yeah, fuck yeah. Oh, sorry, am I allowed to swear? Sorry.
Yes.
Great. I think that actually ties really nicely into my own rant about like the kind of audience stuff and having audiences follow an artist like from one place to the next to the next.
Yeah.
I'm just like thinking about like my own sort of experience in like following a creative like from one place to another with like Kentucky Route Zero and stuff like that, which like for anyone who knows me knows that I bang on about that game like too much, like way too much. But the audio designer and like composer Ben Babbitt, I got really like sucked into like through that game, and then started listening to his own music, sort of funneled by that sort of like thing. And now like whatever project he's going to be involved in, like I want to be there for it. I want to witness those things. And I guess unfortunately that's kind of like a bit of a it can turn into a cult of personality sort of thing where like I guess indie games are like hiring like this person because they've seen them do these things and they were really popular and they'll bring this kind of audience. I mean, like I think that's totally a good thing for audiences and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it could turn into that. Anyway, that's like that's my little thing that I wanted to say. But I think it definitely already has, yeah, there's like that potential is like just there already as well. And that game also had a song with lyrics in it, and it was like one of the best moments in that game was like when this beautiful, like you're in this dive bar and this beautiful like song comes on, and it's the first time that you like, it's the second time that you hear lyrics in like one of the episodes, but it just sort of like washes in, and then you're like making the lyrics as well to the song, and it was cool. It was just brilliant. It was so beautiful, and it really like sucked you in, and like really just sort of like it like tugged at the right heartstring at the right kind of moment. So yeah, there's so much unexplored kind of like landscape, I guess, for like audio designers to be really like, I don't know, bringing in their bands and stuff like that, and and really, pulling those kind of moves.
I'd want to encourage any audio people, music people, or game developers that will hire audio people that are listening to really think about how lyrics could, you know, improve your game design, improve a section of the game, like just bring that emotional level to like a whole other thing. Even if it's, you know, it doesn't have to kind of be necessarily a song in and of itself. There are so many ways that you can just incorporate a bit of singing, a bit of lyrics, you know, whether it's in the credits or whether it's more like a theme song like Bugsnax. We all know kind of how well that did. That's such a great example of how, you know, people really connected with it, and they can just, you know, they connect with it in a different way. Not everyone does listen to game soundtracks afterwards, but I would dare say that most people do listen to music. It's rare to find someone that says, no, I just don't ever listen to Spotify. I don't listen to songs that I like. So if you create songs in your game, then that soundtrack is, I think, much more likely to actually be listened to outside of the game.
Totally.
Yeah.
And even
go for it. I was going to do a spin-off.
Oh, no worries. And even I feel like even if they don't listen to it, it's like you're really entrenching some kind of like beautiful vibe into the like game that you're like designing for as well. Like you're really helping to like hit the emotional beats and stuff with with that kind of like music. I mean, like they do it all the time in films and stuff like that. Like you get the film score and then like composers doing their regular thing, and then it's like, now it's time for the rock show, and then the rock band plays and like something like impactful happens, and it's like and people are like, whoa, it's really getting to me and stuff like that.
At the Twin Peaks like reboot, at the end of every episode there's a band in the pub, and it's so good. Every single one, I'm just like, yes,
it's so fantastic. And I feel like I've always dreamed of a game that was like episodic, that had that kind of like attitude to it. I have fucking like, I'm plagued by visions of making some kind of Melbourne music scene, like in a video game. Anyway,
I think part of like one of the issues around not having like these, you know, songs rather than lots and lots of little loops, is like licensing, you know, because I think that, you know, the other big examples of pop music or you know, kind of mainstream, whether it's indie or not, you know, and we can talk about indie, what that means, both industries. What does indie mean? Whole thing. But you know, there's like FIFA, right? There's all of the pop songs that are on during FIFA. There's Grand Theft Auto, Fast and Furious both have like these radio things. Grand Theft Audio Grand Theft Auto now have like DJ sets in actual clubs inside the game, and things like that. And they work with cool indie DJs also, which is like pretty cool. But I think that, you know, when we're in Australia and when we're in Melbourne especially, when we look at all of these indie studios that work pretty much like bands, you know, I feel like we can DIY ourselves into being able to do this, right? Like find a local Melbourne band, you know, and license a song off them. It's
absolutely.
Some, you know,
and we've got the best music scene for it here. I feel like
we really do.
There's just so many bands. Like there's no shortage of like, you know, really like wonderful small kind of projects that are like fucking absolutely chomping at the bit to do some like,
and when
really
you think about budget,
like
people want to work together, you know. There's not going to be a lot of bands won't know what to charge, for example, and you know, when you approach it more as like, here's an indie studio and here's an indie band, now I've got 5 + 5 people, then it can be more of a collaborative thing rather than a hands-off, I don't want to talk to this band, I just want their song, you know, where like, you deserve to be charged a huge amount.
Yeah, exactly. And you can like both exploit, I want to stop using the word exploit. It just sounds so negative. You can both, you know,
like a natural resource or something.
You can both help each other. You know, like the game gets exposed to the Musos audience and vice versa. I guess this is a bit of a plug. It's actually very relevant. But I recently did something pretty much exactly what you're saying, Maze.
Yeah.
So I approached Samurai Punk, which is an indie, you know, an indie studio in Melbourne. I'd seen their game Justice Sucks Recharge that they were working on, and I wanted to write a song for it. I was like, hey, I'm going to write a song for you. You know, I'll do a demo, collaborate with your composer, and then if you like it, you can use it. If not, I'm just going to take the song and use it for my own thing anyway. Like I was going to release it regardless. So it was a great way for us to collaborate. And the game hasn't come out yet, but to be able to kind of share each other's audiences a little bit there, that was a great experience. It was so wonderful, and they were so up for it. And I think so many studios and indie game developers would be so up for it. And so many bands and artists would be up for it. Like, just go and reach out. Even if you think someone maybe is a little bit too popular, they'll probably be so hyped. What Maze and Alison said before about games being a novelty in the music industry is so true. You go and talk to a band or offer an artist a placement in a game or ask them to write something for you. They're going to, do anything they can to make that happen.
Wasn't there a game out of like a King Gizzard EP or something like that, and that was like a whole thing.
Probably.
And people were like, "Wow, the King Gizzard video game! I want to be a part of that." I mean, like
that's so them. That's really
it
cool.
it really is like very them.
Yeah.
Totally.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
interrupted.
And like, Björk has also released a few like playful
Mm.
type things, and Radiohead also had Polyfauna, which was like a game/album release thing. LCD Sound System had a little game released for their dance night dance. I don't know, but that was pretty cool. Yeah, that was really fun. There are those like even more direct collaborations where there's we're going to make a game with this album or song, and Cable Ties and Cecile did that last year.
Cable Ties did a video game?
Yeah, Hope,
what?
Which I helped produce. Yeah.
Whoa, what?
Last year, yeah, with Cecile. It's a Bitsy game.
How did I miss this?
How did you miss this?
How did I miss this?
Super
I love
cool.
Cable Ties. What the hell?
Yeah,
Cecile
I love
literally
Cable
just
Ties too.
posted in the chat, so far I've used 2 licensed songs from local musical acts in my games. That's awesome. Like,
Happening.
I'm sure Cecile could get on here and talk about it being a great experience, presumably.
Yeah.
I imagine it would be. If it's cool, I might move us on to a slightly different topic.
Sure. Wait, one more thing. Well, I want to
okay,
talk about
okay.
like the artistic expression thing, because I think
Great.
that also relates to how like, when you're like doing game audio, you're often just doing what the client wants, I suppose. And often it doesn't feel like there's a lot of room to actually like write a song, and like, I was really lucky working with Wolfire this year. We did a big update to Receiver 2, and there was like this, it's a big like new area thing where you can play music over the PA. And I got to do a cover album because I'm not the composer on that game. I'm the technical sound person. And I got to like write songs and stuff as a cover album, and that that was a really cool chance for some actual kind of artistic expression again.
And that was an awesome album as well.
Thank you.
That's
It's on
sick.
Bandcamp.
Bye now.
Yeah.
Can I quickly also mention
Yeah.
that artistic expression? I feel like that also extends to like sound design. And now it's time for me to do a plug.
Woo!
Like I've been working on like this sort of, well, I've like actually never made games before and stuff like that, but so it was my first kind of project doing it. But I was working on a game about observation, and it's we're still in development about stuff, but it was like no visuals, and one of the things, like just completely no visuals, you have to navigate entirely by sound, but like one of the things that was really, really fun was coming up with like really expressive like sound design, and having your own project to work on to do that kind of stuff was just like it was like so much fun. It's like the most fun I've ever had doing any kind of sound design, and like I love composing and stuff like that, but like my heart is like so into making just like weird sounds and solutions to that kind of stuff, and being able to really like go kind of nuts with it is like, it's such a beautiful feeling. I think if like sound designers are able to like have that kind of take up that space in like in a games company, or like, if you're like a developer and you've got a sound design person, like ask them what weird stuff they can do. They'll probably come up with some really weird shit that you never even thought about, and it'd be fucking awesome. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, I think giving people that creative freedom to create something that kind of is like, I guess, more meaningful to their musical soul, or to their their true creative passion, and particularly if it has lyrics or just is able to express their voice. I think that just also adds another dimension to your game, because it's so much more explicitly someone else's thing, even if it's in line with your game direction and your game design, as opposed to instrumental music, which can, of course, be the expression of the composer, and same with sound design, but explicitly making room for that, and allowing them to choose what that is, I think is really special. I am going to move us on to a slightly different topic that's a little bit more related to Games Gig. So Games Gig was meant to be an in-person live performance of games, composers, sound designers, artists performing our own music. And so that's still going ahead tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Via Freeplay and YouTube. So if you're interested in watching that, we'll all be playing, plus Riverboy will be playing as well. It's going to be very fun. But kind of a really big thing that Maze and I wanted to achieve, I suppose, when we put it together initially, was to give space for ourselves and Alison and Riverboy and just composers and sound designers in general to perform live. It's such a rare occasion that, a game audio person gets to perform their music by kind of choosing that career. Unless they do it as a side hustle, they kind of eliminate that aspect of music from their life. In indie games, we have a bit more flexibility, I guess, and we all kind of create music that's not played by massive orchestras, or maybe some of it is, but we have plenty that isn't. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I want to ask you, Alison and Maze, what being able to perform live means to you, and what it would mean to you if, developers actually gave you the opportunity, or, the games industry encouraged that more, how that would change your relationship, with your job.
I think I might not have the best perspective on this, because all the developers that I've worked with, which is not many, would sort of be like, yep, go ahead, do it, whatever. And it'd be a really fun thing for them. But like being able to have space to sort of bring like, to sort of like actually bring like the game audio specifically into a live environment. Because like I play live shows, I know I toned that down when I introduced myself, but like I do play a lot of live shows, solo stuff and other things, like, and being able to sort of bring intentionally like the video game soundtrack into it, rather than being like, okay, I've got to make like, this is for a music crowd, it's for all these kinds of people, so it's going to be this, and like it's not going to be particularly like about this other thing, is really wonderful. It's really wonderful to be able to like bring those sounds and like go like, oh, what can I do with them? How can I like use them in a live setting? It's like, it's so like, I mean, it's been really challenging trying to like get them into a like performable kind of state.
Yeah.
Because of course, like when you make these things, it's like, they're like the whole thing, and like they're intricately designed to sort of like let the, I mean, like you let the computer like do all the like playing of the music and stuff like that, and you like play the parts, and then it kind of does everything. But like having to put everything together in such a way to really like be able to sort of like play that live is really interesting. And I think it'd be really interesting making like music in the future with the intention of like, it's going to be in the game, but I also have to be able to perform it live. How does that inform the way that I make this? And how does that like change the way that I like think about like what's possible in the scape? And that kind of limitation is like I love it. I love limitations. Like give me less to think about, and it's so much more fun. I mean, that's like an adage that has been like, that's like beating a dead horse at this point, but like,
sure. But I think that
that is a gross analogy.
The image straight away beamed into my brain, and I was like, oh.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I've got this kind of like jacket on that makes me feel kind of 70s, so I sort of like feel like my dad would be like saying shit that my dad would say.
Yeah, I think like for me that, even if I like legally owned the rights to be able to perform music and stuff, I don't really have the time to like, unsupported, if the studio didn't also support me to like sell tickets, you know, make sure an audience is actually coming, allow me to practice that set, you know, like it's a bit different. The support, I guess, I would like from a studio, you know, and like, yeah, and I think I'm only coming to that, you know, now that I've had to organize this gig, which is so annoying that it's not live after all of that. While previously, I mean, you know, I toured 2019 with Noise Draws, and, you know, that was something that I had to practice the sets and make sure that I could do the 10-minute, 20-minute, 40-minute versions of each set. And yeah, I think that it would be really cool if a studio could be like, hey, audience to our games, like come to the TOFF, you know, and yeah, contribute to that being a concert that is like within the studio game law, you know. Yeah, even if it was like, I don't know, like a kind of transmedia kind of deal where we, I don't know, got the Wayward ship and and had people come on to the Wayward deck and listen to music, you know. I don't know,
That'd be
I
so
think
awesome.
yeah, things could be supported a lot more than they're like, yeah, go for it, bye. You know.
Totally. And I have seen that a little bit. Oh, you know what? Actually, only once at a gaming expo in Canada. One of the kind of indie games that was being showcased got to do a live set at the expo, but like in the expo hall, it wasn't a sectioned off separate thing. And that was so much fun. And I think, like you said, kind of getting an audience and figuring out how to do that's probably quite hard for smaller and indie studios, but aligning it, like there's plenty of games events that happen, you know, around the world and in Australia. And I think if indie studios kind of thought about using the live performance of their soundtrack as a marketing tool, you know, I think it could really work for some studios, particularly if the soundtrack, you know, is a bit of a focus of the game, and is really thought about. And I'd be curious to know for you, Maze, how, if you knew that the audio was going to be performed live, how that would change how you composed it and how you... Yeah.
So much.
Do you think it would be for the better though?
I think it's interesting, like, you know, I'm thinking specifically about the Receiver 2 album, because I think that, you know, for our lineup, that was a bit more suitable than the Wayward soundtrack, which is very acoustic guitar and very like noodly.
I feel like that would pop off in a Melbourne dive bar, honestly.
The Wayward soundtrack?
Yeah, people would be sitting down, they'd be like just kind of having a nice time. Like, I love gigs like that. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I think it would be nice. But for our lineup, I think it was more a Receiver vibe. But like, yeah, I don't, because that game, the songs were actually songs also, and it wasn't for like dynamic looping stuff. I think, yeah, I would have organized my Ableton session a bit differently so that I could perform it live. I've done a bit of work to make things like improvisable. Yeah, and I guess with Wayward, I probably wouldn't make it so guitar based, and like with the Wayward Strand guitar, like it's very me. And I'd probably write things that were easier for other people to pick up and play. Yeah, because I think for Wayward it would be cool to have like a 3-piece, like guitar and guitar and cello probably at least, but guitar, cello, and like, I don't know, a small baby piano.
Would you ever think about pitching to a design studio, like if they wanted to hire you specifically as a musician or a composer? Would you ever pitch to them like, hey, what if it was just not me? What if it was not just me? It was like these other people and we played as a group, and then like I do like the composing, but like, you know, there's these other people involved and it could be really great. Like, would you ever do that?
Well, that's cool. I should so
Yeah.
it comes down to money again,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Like, if it was just me, I get all the money. If it's me and two others, then I get less of the money.
well, I
Yeah,
guess
totally.
you can kind of, if their budget was X,
Yeah.
then you go, okay, well, that budget's great, but we can do this extra super special amazing thing if you add an extra 20K onto the budget.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
I guess that really depends on
totally.
the studio. But
Yeah.
I think definitely empowering yourself to try and convince the studio to do these exciting music things. They probably don't know about it, or they wouldn't know that you could just get some musos in a room and improvise
Totally.
a composition. They don't think
Totally.
about that stuff and how magical that would be, and how that would add to their game, and how it would add to the uniqueness and all of that kind of stuff.
This
My
is such a
favorite game
oh.
soundtrack of all time is Grim Fandango. And Peter McConnell did that, who's like mega LucasArts Star Wars stuff. And I remember reading an interview with him where, so the Grim Fandango soundtrack is like a small jazz band, and it's led by the clarinetist, who plays bass clary most of the time. And I remember reading an interview where he was like, oh yeah, I sketched some few things and then I gave them to the bass clarinetist and then they went off. And I was like, yes, like this is such a good composer who knows how jazz bands work, knows that he doesn't have to give that much direction. Here's like some key cues, to hit. And then like, yeah, go, and yeah, I think that like that's a really cool dynamic, and that is my favorite soundtrack of all time.
Totally.
There you go. So I think that kind of points to the value of looking at people that have lots of experience in bands and in these other kinds of music settings and this other industry, rather than just the kind of games audio and like film audio composition industry. Not to like downplay the value of those composers, but I think if your game calls for it, you really can look outside. I'm just going to put it out there. We've probably got 10 or 12 minutes left. If there was any questions about Games Gig or about kind of the mishmash of games and music industry or anything that we've talked about, throw it into the chat now, and we'll definitely grab it and talk about it. I've just seen what you've said, Billy Dent. You're at MagFest in the US, a music and games convention that started 2020, and you loved how much the most central space of the convention was a designated jam space. Everyone just rocked up with instruments. That sounds great. I think we could totally get away with something like that.
It'd be so good. I love that kind of stuff.
Maybe Free Play 2022 we'll have a jam
Fuck
night.
Yeah.
Can
I say one thing about the just before we go into questions about that like kind of band dynamic? I was thinking like it also speaks to some kind of attitude of like I feel as composers and like audio people in this kind of production role, we're like really isolated from each other until we're like sort of like, oh, you do this too. Hello. I mean, like, we're all friends and stuff like that, but like in like a work sense and in like a job sense, we're like we're like these like distant planets, and until we send like little like envoys off to like communicate and stuff, and there's not much sort of like, I feel like there's not as much cross-pollination of like what of like ideas and stuff, and what music feels like, what music like kind of is to me, which is like this kind of group event. Like you get your friends involved, like you get people who you really like trust and enjoy to make music with you, and you sit in a room and you do some stuff and you just like have a really like wonderful time like working through things and nitpicking at stuff together, and I think that could be a really like wonderful thing to see more of, just also from maybe a mental health standpoint, like doing these kinds of
I think that's like habitual almost from the like emotional side, is like for me, I think a lot of my isolation comes from I can work in games, this super broy dude heavy toxic industry, and that's how it really felt when I first got into games audio, and was trying to gel with the rest of the people in game audio in Melbourne, I was like, nah, this sucks. I hate all of you. not so much that, but just the like, oh wow, this really isn't a community for me. Everyone is a white cis dude, and everyone's making like, I don't know, shooty games and stuff like that, and viewing each other as competition, I think, and that's part of, I guess, why I felt quite isolated in game audio.
Totally. Music is collaboration,
Yeah,
like
and
at its root.
yeah.
Absolutely. And what you just said before, Alison, about, when you get kind of in a room with a group of musicians or a band, and it's just like a really special and unique thing, and it kind of uplifts you in a different way to working solo. What I would love to see, maybe I need to make it happen, is a game jam that's really, but it's done by a game studio. So the indie studio does a game jam while the indie band does like a music jam over a few days and writes a couple of songs.
Huge.
And they keep in touch with what they're making, and it's kind of like maybe a brief or a theme or some kind of creative vision that they've agreed on, but giving the opportunity for, both kind of groups to have a little jam together and to get each other involved. There's plenty of game developers that are also a bit musical, but don't really do it much. It's kind of a side thing. So maybe they could get involved, and it would be interesting for the bands to kind of see how a game is actually made. That would probably make them a lot more confident with wanting to approach studios, making friends. So
That's a mad idea.
Yeah, in closing, I really, really want that to happen. So look out for that. I'm really excited that I've just thought of that.
Can I be involved?
Absolutely, yes.
Put me on
I guess
drums.
maybe the last thing we can go over, I'd love to hear from both of you about, what you would love to see in the next year or two, or just any ideas of how developers actually can come together with indie musicians in very practical ways.
Well, I think for me, is just pointing out a lot of those parallels of like, here's bedroom 3-person game dev team, and here's a 3-person band, and trying to, see that they both have a lot of the same values and a lot of the same practices, so that things aren't so like intensely separate. And, things like zine culture and all of these small DIY stuff that we can, collaborate on, I suppose. Yeah. I think for me, like, often being that person between the composer and the dev team, being the one who's implementing the music and audio. I'm just excited to work with, I don't know, not the normal games composer, work with bands and stuff.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
And anything else from you, Alison?
I just want to work with bands. Like, I would love to. I would love to sort of like, have the. I mean, it's like sort of a money issue, honestly. Like, because a lot of like bands and stuff like that, it's like you write the music, you play the music, it's all free. Like, you bring that out into the world without money. But when it comes to like, I gotta write all this music and then I gotta ask people to learn it and play it, that's a lot of time, that's a lot of fucking money. And I would love to see, I think I would actually just like to see the jam idea. Like, that seems really, really good, because like you're building that from the ground up, as opposed to coming in and being like, hey, we can do this thing, but I need this amount of money, and asking from that. I think like building studios from the ground up with like audio in mind, like from the get-go, with like a group of a group of like a little band or something, then that would be the best way forward for that sort of thing, because it seems really integrated, as opposed to just like this afterthought of like, we'll get them in. Like, I feel like you can't do that so much with these kinds of bigger scale stuff. And it's like, I think it's to the benefit of the project, like every single time, if the audio is like there from the beginning, because you can really bounce off each other about those things. Like, just like the artist can bounce off the designer about things of like, I got this cool asset, where can we put it? Oh, we can put it here, we can do all these things with it, the same's true of the music.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
I
something
agree.
that Games Gig really shows off is that, you know, like here's here's for people who are doing both industries, you know, who pretty much, you know, exemplify these ideas. And I think it's, you know, it helps to sort of define that, you know, the next step being a jam kind of makes sense because helping to create that knowledge and that artistic communication and cultural exchange and all of that, and create that like I don't know, like repertoire, like language, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that
It's like that idea of companion planting, when you put two plants that work really well together, but you put them together from seedlings and they do really well together.
Totally.
That's how it works.
And as game developers, we all, you know, or most of us have experienced that we've made friends from game jams in some way or another from, you know, or when we were first learning to make games, you know, and it takes a long time for those relationships and collaborations to come to fruition. So I want to take these last few minutes to thank everyone and also invite everyone again to come along to Games Gig tomorrow night. So I'll be performing, my artist name is Monster Mansion. I do lots of synth pop kind of stuff. If you're into that, you can go and look it up and then come and sing along with me tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Maze, do you want to tell a little bit about what you'll kind of be doing? What everyone's looking for?
Yeah, so I've changed things up a little bit. I think we all have a little bit to suit a more kind of fireside jam for tomorrow night. So I'm going to be playing a little bit of Receiver 2 music and a little bit of Wayward music also. And to answer that question, Melb Mayor, yeah, the Victorian Music Development Office is a government body, and they have been helping to unify music artists and game developers. So yeah, there's heaps of room. And if you are a government body and you want to help to put on this jam or to put on the next Games Gig, definitely talk to Jake or I, because we are here and ready to accept your help.
Yeah, absolutely. To quickly jump on that, I've recently got some funding for something which I can't talk about yet, that kind of does that. It's more of a behind the scenes thing rather than a performance. But yeah, look, you can send me an email at contact@monstermansion.io to talk if there's anyone in the audience that wants to kind of talk about that kind of stuff. And me and Maze can kind of help figure that out. We've both kind of been involved a lot with that kind of stuff. So yes, absolutely. Money funding helps a lot. So thanks for the question. Maze, did you want to finish off?
Yeah, I'm going to be playing some cutesy Wayward music and some less cutesy Receiver music. And Alison, what are you going to be playing tomorrow night?
Can I share my screen?
Oh, yes.
Please.
You disabled screen sharing. That's okay.
No.
I'm going to be doing some ambient stuff. Maybe you'll see more. It's like a twist. Ooh, screen share's enabled. Yay. Where is it?
I'm going to be
doing
this.
this.
Live coding.
That's what I'm going to be doing. It'll be nice and ambient, and then perhaps we'll do a mad rave at the end of it. Get up, have a dance. Please get up and have a dance. I will. That's encouraging for other people.
Riverboy is going to be playing some of their Willow Beats sets and some of their own music as well, and maybe some games music, some of their special awesome games music coming up. So yeah, but it's going to be a beautiful vibe, and I think there's going to be fairy lights.
There'll definitely be some fairy lights, and just a nice mix of like singing and instrumental and raving and chill stuff. So we'd really love for you to come along. So I guess kind of with that note, thank you everyone for listening and commenting and your questions. Thank you Freeplay for giving us this space to talk. And I guess we'll see you tomorrow night, hopefully.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.